And good evening. It is the top of the hour, right at 7 p.m. And I'm Doc Metter, host of Seams and Downs podcast. We've got a lot to cover tonight because, with it being after the July 4th holiday, which I'm hoping that you all had a wonderful and safe July 4th holiday, we are at that moment of getting back to the gridiron. And so tonight's coverage is going to discuss back on the gridiron and the the football season or the football returning to practice after that dead period. What a day it was, what an event it is. Again, welcome back for those listeners that are loyal and you continue to show support to us. Much appreciation to you all. Again, this podcast was designed and developed with all intents and purposes of communicating and talking about those and bringing to life the stories of those athletes, coaches, and of course those minor events that turn into major laughs. And so here we are. So again, back at it. Here we are, back on the gridiron, returning back to practice after the dead period. So just to kind of go over a couple of things. Here in Tennessee, we have TSSAA. And for those who don't know that, it's your Tennessee Secondary Scholastic Athletic Association or Sports Athletic Association. But this is that governing body, if you will, that goes in and essentially tells your high school and your intermediate schools that are there, the middle schools, if you will, what it is that they can and cannot do as far as coaching staff. And there's guidelines, there's best practices, there's things that it's really a good period or a good thing, right? To have that governing body or regulatory body, if you will. I know that when I actually coached, we would have summer meetings and we would get together with TSSAA and we would go over the changes for the year, or we would go over new things that were being open for discussion to address rules, policies, things of that nature. But again, Tennessee, the TSS mandates that we have a 2-week dead period. So we're going to talk about what dead period means. I don't have too many first day backstories other than Ben was not like Ben when we got back in the car today. And that may be, again, he essentially mentioned that we were gassed. And more to come on that. But now that we're back, we have that very, very intentional focus. School's right around the corner, particularly for Bartlett City schools. We're expecting to get back and started in August. Many of the teachers are already starting to prepare to get back to and report for in-service meetings and things of that nature. So, it is what it is. It's going to be a busy time. We're getting ready for fall, right? So, in that, this time is that preparatory time, the mindset, right? That so now is a time for preparing oneself and getting oneself with mindfulness, but really going in and we're going to talk about some mindset tips. So if you will, indulge me, sit back, relax. I've got a Coca-Cola Zero for tonight. I do not have any other thing with me. So, sit back, enjoy, and let's talk about this real quick. So, what is the TSS dead period? By definition, the Tennessee Secondary School Athletic Association. Okay, that scholastic, the scholastic aspect of it, right? So Tennessee Secondary School Athletic Association actually mandates that there be a 2-week with no contact workouts or practices for those athletes, right? My wife's involved with that. She, as a softball coach, she cannot have contact with anyone, so it's a dead period. As we use this time, particularly with Ben going into freshman year of playing football with Bartlett, where we use this time to sit back and rest. Ben did rest. He was still active. He still did things. We went down to the Y. He still lifted weights, so on and so forth, but was not involved where it was not a sanctioned event. Everything was private. There were no coaches around. But again, he would go to the Y. They would play basketball. They would do, he would work out with his friends. But again, nothing was sanctioned, right? Again, no contact, no workouts, no practices. My wife had the fear of God in her, and did not want to see any players even out in public. So we adjusted our shopping habits and our patterns. That way, again, she would not make contact with folks and potentially her players on the softball team at the grocery store. So lots of things that are going there. Why is a dead period important? Well, one, I mean, the dead period is for us is smack in the middle of the summer, right? So, they did conditioning and things in June, rounded out the last week of June and the first week of July with that dead period. But it's a time of recharging and rest, and it gives both the players as well as the coaches that needed time for rest and resetting and again, time for family, time with family. I mean, this is a big commitment that your athlete and my athlete is going through. They're giving up their entire summer to be a football player, to advance themselves as a team. And of course, this is a big, hairy deal, right? Not to be taken lightly. So that 2-week dead period is important because it gives both players as well as the coaches that much needed time for rest, reprieve, and of course to reset with family and so on and so forth. Some athletes will actually use the time for travel ball, vacations, and essentially just rest. I know that our vacation times have now been adjusted to the dead period in the summers. And so we are avidly, planning and preparing for the next year to use that time as our vacation period. So more to come on that. That should be pretty interesting. But again, players can pick up on some travel ball. Again, non-sanctioned events hosted or authorized by their school affiliate, but of course they can do that. And vacations, right? Again, this is that transition period. June was conditioning, right? Getting those football players back into, you've had your seniors. Your seniors have left. Your upperclassmen or what were your junior class and your sophomore class are now your upper, moving, advancing another grade level. And of course, they're all getting back to it. You're talking about a period of time where you may not have, been so avid with running and things of that nature. So June is one thing, the conditioning, okay, it's still rather warm. July is when it's all over. July, pads, helmets, these things start to come out. Now, I think it's absolutely fascinating. I'm also going to talk about it tonight in reference to the TSSAA rules. I physically looked some of these things up just to, again, have a conversation with you and came across a lot of legalese, which is probably why, I may not have been a very good coach the first time. No, you're right. Or I'm right. We didn't win a state championship or anything, but, I held my own. But, in the thick of it, as I was reading through some of this stuff, some of it I did understand. I put my old coach's hat back on, and I was like, this, okay, I understand what this is saying. And then, of course, I'm not an attorney or a lawyer, and as I was looking, I was like, I mean, what is this? That's why we have coaches, right? And of course, we have school officials that do understand this stuff. So where I felt lost, after a couple of sentences, so on and so forth, there were key points that were in there that, actually was beneficial for me. And of course, we're going to make those highlights known with our show tonight. So, what's inside again, we just referenced that June is one thing, the conditioning, July is another. Look, folks, it is hot down here. It was hot down here today. I got out there. It was 6:30 this morning as I was driving Ben to practice, and it was just dank outside. I mean, it was muggy, and of course, it miserably just dank. You literally started to sweat as you walked out of the door. Have you ever been in those situations? And yeah, you leave the house all nice and clean, and all of a sudden, before you even get in the car, you got that sweat back, right? So you got that sweat back, and you're all in your seat and everything. It's just that uncomfortable feeling. I suppose things could be worse, but it's still very uncomfortable with the whole sweat back. I don't know. You may like it though. I don't know. But like I said, it's go time in July, and what I mean by that is, again, helmets are out. Helmets were out today. And with TSSAA rules, right, for the state of Tennessee, I can't speak for the state of Mississippi. I would certainly, if you're a listener from Mississippi, I would highly, highly encourage you to go in and snag yourself the Mississippi rules for your school athletic associations and things of that nature. I would definitely, take a look at that. And this goes for other states as well. But as far as our guidelines, week one, and there's a difference between like week one and week two. Interesting stuff, to say the least. Week one is that period where you come in, you can fit out with the pads, but workouts and everything else, anything that's in that time is part of practice. Like you can't immediately go in and say, all right, well, we're going to practice now and we're going to work out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's, workouts, everything else, it's all one cohesive practice time frame, right? And there's got to be a reason for that because, before you know it, practice is going to take all day, right? So TSSAA, and of course, I will attach the practice regulations for those parents who are concerned about practice out in the heat, so on and so forth. TSSAA again has some fairly simple practice regulations that teams, coaches, coaching staff can follow, and I love the fact that TSSAA prefaces their regulations, which were actually updated in June of 2024, mind you, at least the information that I've got available to me right now. But they preface everything with definitions. For example, they define what bags are. They define what control is. They define what full contact live action thuds practice is. And for those that are curious, what's so interesting about this is that by TSSAA definition, a practice is considered that period of time that a participant engages in a coached, supervised physical activity, whether that be warm-ups, stretches, cool-down activities, as part of a 3-hour practice time. Keep in mind, a 3-hour practice time. So I drop Ben off, as I drop Ben off, I drop him off at 6:30. Practice promptly begins at 7. Of course, they hit the weight room. That's the first thing that they get. And by the time I pick him up at 10 o'clock, he is headed back to, or, going back to the field house and getting his gear. That way I could pick him up. It also states that all conditioning and weight room activities are considered a part of practice, which I found very interesting too. Again, I mentioned it just a moment ago. So it's now considered part of practice, regardless of the temperature of the location, whether these activities actually take place, or unless adequate rest and recovery occurs between the weight training and the conditioning itself. And the subsequent practice. Interesting stuff, though, right? Subsequent practice. So that legalese, what is there? As I was reading through some of this stuff, it's kind of like, just get to the point here, bub. Should have some sort of a certified athletic trainer or an appropriate healthcare professional or provider that's there to help assist and determine what can be considered, adequate rest, recovery based on the difficulty or maybe difficulty is wrong, maybe rigor, the rigor of your weight training, and of course your conditioning session. In addition to that, you have to look at the weight training and the conditioning itself and the physical condition of the athletes involved. So keep in mind, started this process in June was conditioning, getting these incoming freshmen prepared, ready for the weight room. Ben was so excited today that, as he walked in, he was like, "Oh, I've already gone up 10 pounds on the weights that I can lift, so on and so forth." So, obviously being molded and groomed and already has the stamina and the capability to begin, moving into that next phase, the next phase, if you will. TSSAA also offers the best practices. And I found that very, very interesting, as far as best practices. They do follow for the TSSAA, the state of Tennessee, they do follow the guidelines of having an emergency action plan that's, one, developed but also rehearsed, and having a customized emergency action plan, and they provide a link on where one can go. And there is a link or an entity out there. It's called www.anyonecansay.org. So check them out. I was looking through that, just kind of talk about the emergency action plan. And that is the heat policy. The heat policy is in effect at all times. There are certain guidelines for high schools, having a cold water immersion tub, or a method for rapid on-site cooling should be available for all warm weather practices. Again, having that either a cold water immersion tub or, some alternative method for rapidly cooling a player down. I'll just give you an example. So, although it was the first day back, Ben talked about, gassers, things of that nature, getting their wind up. They've had a 2-week break, so you got to knock the rust off a little edge, sharpen that edge a little bit. All right, yeah, it's all about being the tip of the spear, or sharpening the sword, if you will. And so they're had to knock a little rust off, get them back used to things, get them back into the routine. But again, that was June. It is now July, and we're not playing. With preseason regulations, what I found very, very interesting about this is that this stuff is all laid out. Single practice days are, a 7 versus 7 school. It's a single practice days only, right now for week one. Okay, they break these things down by weeks. If the school chooses to practice, helmets are the only piece of equipment that may be worn. I found that very interesting. So week one is helmets only. And then, of course, as you move into week 2, you have the heat the heat acclimatizing, if you will, okay, or you're getting used to that heat environment. Again, single practice days, and if they the schools choose to practice, helmets are the only piece of equipment that may be worn, even during week 2. If a team chooses to practice outside in helmets only during Thursday and Friday, or Friday and Saturday of week 2, those actually count. They may count towards the days, or they count towards heat, the heat acclimation, if you will. But they have to document the players that are present for those practices. It gets a little tricky, and I'm not going to go through the entire rule book, but this is important stuff, that one needs to know. And again, this is coming from the updated version of June 2024, and I have not seen newer information, and if there is, we can certainly, talk about that and get that publicized. But week 3, still in that heat acclimation, if you will. If a team documents 2 days in helmets during week 2, exactly 3 days in helmets and shoulder pads only can happen, soon thereafter. And what that means is, again, helmets, shoulder pads, no pants, tights below the knee, and the other 2 days must be helmets only. Okay? So 5 days a week, not 4 days a week, 2 days in helmets, 3 days with helmets and pads only. And of course, this is for week 3. So in week 3, if a team documented 2 days in helmets during week 2, exactly 3 days. Also, the 3 days in helmets and shoulder pads are only that is also in effect as well. If the team did not document 2 days in helmets during the week 2, okay? Day 1 helmets only, day 2 helmets only, day 3 helmets and shoulder pads only, and the same follows as well. So I just talked about the other 2 days must be helmets only. And here's where that legalese comes in, right? And here's where a coach, a football coach would understand this stuff. So if a team documented 2 days in helmets during week 2, exactly 3 days in helmets and shoulder pads only, that rule applies there as well. Okay. But this one right here, the other 2 days are at most helmets only. So again, week 3, as I'm reading through this stuff, I'm reading one thing that says about a team documented 2 days in helmets during week 2. Going through the motions of reading the verbiage here, exactly 3 days in helmets and shoulder pads only. The other 2 days must be helmets only. But then immediately goes down to, another rule. If a team documented 2 days in helmets during week 2, exactly 3 days in helmets and shoulder pads only, the other 2 days are at most helmets only. Again, as a parent, would kind of like to know what that means. Goes from must to at most. Again, all it does is take, one word, must and most, and that could change. That changes the entire dynamic of what the rule or what the regulation means. So, interesting thing there as we come across it. And then, of course, you get to if a team did not document 2 days in helmets during week 2. Well, there's nothing there. I mean, they're day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are much like the helmets and the pads, helmets and shoulder pads only. It's, day 1 helmets only, day 2 helmets only, and day 3, 4, and 5. So again, I'm not a football coach, but I do like to look and evaluate from a scientific mind, if you will. I do find things very, very interesting, and I do dissect them and try to, I wouldn't say necessarily pull them apart, but, obviously, it's involving my son, and so, what's important to him is important to me, and so it's just a part of it's par for the course, if you will. Moving forward, week 4, 5, and 6. Boom. Weeks 4, 5, and 6 of this, of these practice periods, preseason practice are full padded practices beginning for individuals who have participated in 2 days of helmets only. Okay. And 3 days of helmets and shoulder pads. So this has got to be some as I've read this or am reading this, I'm seeing it as, okay, something's going on here. This may be for transfers. This may be for incoming players and the moving around of players. And so, maybe those rules apply to that. And so, that's the general nature of it. But At any rate, weeks 4, 5, and 6 are full padded practices for beginning individuals who have participated in both the 2 days of helmets only and, of course, the 3 days of helmets and/or shoulder pads. Again, that practice time for weeks 4, 5, and 6, very, very interesting, cannot exceed, the 3 hours in a single practice. But weeks 4, 5, and 6, double practices and double practice days can actually begin. But they can't occur on consecutive days, but again, not on consecutive days. So if your institution or your athlete is, having to endure those 2-a-days, many have gone before them, and there's going to be more of that continue. So this is that period of time where, again, those 2-a-days can again begin and shall not occur. Shall not occur. I like that verbiage. If there are multiple practices on a single day, only one session per day should include full contact. Yep. Only one practice a day should include full contact. I do like that rule. I like that rule a lot. Football players, get hurt. They get injured. Big difference between being hurt and being injured. But at any rate, full contact 2 times a day, 5 days a week, you're the odds of you injuring or severely hurting and sidelining a player, I can see this potentially happen with that. So I actually like that rule right there. Again, the total practice time may not exceed 5 hours, even if you're doing 2 days. Practices have to be separated by at least 3 hours of rest in a cool environment. So we're starting to get pretty granular with these rules as we're moving forward into that 3-week period, week 4, 5, and 6. On single practice days, one walkthrough is permitted, and then of course it's separated from the practice by at least 3 hours of continuous rest. Again, terms like cool environment, continuous rest, walkthrough, these are those important pieces. At least in my mind, these are important for the maintenance of my athlete, right? And so very interesting stuff here. And then of course on double practice days, walkthroughs are not permitted unless the time of the walkthrough is actually counted towards the total practice time. Okay, so what is by no means am I a legal expert, but how I look at this right here, or how I'm seeing it, when they have 2 practices, they have to count that time of the walkthrough towards the total practice time. Keep in mind, it cannot exceed 5 hours, right? So in that 5 hours, there's got to be that 3-hour break where you've got to have, a rest period in a cool environment. And then, of course, you've got walkthroughs that are now permitted. Of course, it gets even further. What talks about or what it talks about when weather comes through, weather permitting, as I continue to hear in the back of my head. But if weather postpones a practice, the practice can actually resume after the conditions are deemed safe. Right? So like in softball, you've got a weather delay or a rain delay or a lightning delay, more so with a lightning delay as we've seen, game time will pick right back up wherever you left off. Same strike, same pitch, same momentum as where you left off, or where that weather, forced the stoppage of the game. Again, conditions and the environment have got to be deemed safe, and the remainder of the allotted practice time can actually be completed as a result, at that. Moving beyond weeks 4, 5, and 6, looking at week 7. Again, this is that preseason time frame. Looking at week 7, and of course following that, full contact is limited to no more than 3 practices per week. All right, but under TSSAA guidelines here. So, we can look forward to that, right? So at this point, week 7 and beyond, we're now in school, right? So we're beyond that summer time frame. But I think it's important to know this stuff as we're going down through these, as we're evaluating TSSAA and what these rules mean, things like full contact, walkthroughs. Yeah, these are important, these are important, pieces of one to a player. But, it's important that coaches, have know and they understand what they can and cannot do for the safety. And then they do, right? For the safety and wherewithal of our athletes that are out there with them. Again, full practice or full contact and practice shall not be more than 30 minutes per day per. Practice, is not permitted as far as full contact is not permitted on 3 consecutive days. Again, not allowed. No more than 3 practices are not allowed in more than 3 practices a week. Shall not last more than 30 minutes per day per group. And those practices cannot happen on 3 consecutive days. So interesting stuff there, and I highly encourage you to go out and take a look at this stuff, get yourself, in line with this and just read through it, particularly for our Tennessee parents that are out there and going through and trying to figure this stuff out, as well. You may not have an interest in this. TSSAA rules may not, you could tell somebody to go kick rocks, right? But, again, it's hot out there, knowing the rules and just, making sure that you're aligned to the rules. And if you have concerns, you're going to a source. And if you've got concerns for a coach, you're bringing those concerns with a regular, after having reviewed a regulatory body of one, a document, but 2, a regulatory body, and you can bring these concerns to your coach and say, hey, what does this mean right here, so on and so forth. They know. Those coaches know, I can assure you. So, interesting stuff there. So, I want to talk about the fundamentals of the acclimation of your athlete when it comes to heat. According to the TSSAA, right? The majority of heat-related deaths occur during the first few days of practice. Okay? Where TSSAA got their sources, it's very unfortunate. These are bullet points that are provided out there. Again, this information is current as of June 2024, so slightly over a year in age, or slightly over a year in that adoption date, right? Athletes are also 4 times more likely to suffer a heat-related illness when practicing longer than 3 continuous hours. I did find that fun fact very, very interesting. 4 times more likely to suffer a heat-related illness when practicing longer than 3 continuous hours. I found that one really interesting. Physical exertion and training activities should begin slowly and continue progressively. If you go back and you play this again and you hear how we talked about going from week 1 to week 2, that's that, these are those fundamentals for the acclimation of the athlete. You're going week 1 with just helmets only. And then in week 2, 2 days of helmets only, 3 days of your pads and helmets only. Nothing, no pants, nothing below the knee, so on and so forth. Then you progress through week 3, and then from weeks 4 to 5, you start to progressively elaborate into a different type of practice, right? Full pads, full contact, things of that nature starts to become more commonplace as far as verbiage. And there's things that are now put in place, and so those coaches now know. And then, of course, you have beyond, week 6, you move into week 7 and beyond. But physical exertion and training activities, while slow and continuing progressively, an athlete cannot be considered conditioned in a period of only 2 to 3 weeks. That's physically highlighted in TSSAA rules. Very interesting things. So it's telling the coaches, okay, be mindful about that mindset of having somebody prepped in 2 or 3 weeks. Again, player safety is paramount here. And as TSSAA says, without any real source work, but they mention it, that the majority of heat-related deaths occur during the first few days of practice. Having an emergency action plan, again, a very clearly defined, written and practiced protocol in the event that you have a heat-related illness. This is that time. All right. Again, it was 93 degrees out here in the city of Memphis today. Of course, that was the high, so. But even in the morning, when you're at 78 degrees already at 6:30 in the morning, or 83 degrees at 6:30 in the morning, and that wet bulb goes up and that humidity is high and mighty, oh yeah, it'll take a toll on you. I will say that as Ben got in the car today, his water bottle that he had was absolutely bone dry. I mean, there was no more droppage of water in that thing. But TSSAA also talks about that, Tennessee has a state law that now requires that the emergency action plan be rehearsed annually. So that's a good thing. If your athlete is part of another state, take a look at that. That is now written into Tennessee state law, requiring that an emergency action plan be rehearsed annually. And a customized action plan, again, we mentioned anyonecansavealife.org just a little while ago. That customized action plan can be developed, from the www.anyonecansavealife.org. So check that out if that's of interest for you. Keeping each individual's level of conditioning and medical status in mind, and being able to adjust that activity accordingly, can actually play a factor in directly affecting heat exertion. So again, looking at the individual level, the conditioning of your athlete, the medical status, and keeping that medical status in mind, again, can adjust the activity. And then, of course, particularly as far as another fundamental for catching and observing and just keeping an eye out is recognizing those early signs of distress developing, with heat illnesses, cramping, looking for dizziness, headaches, deterioration in performance, signs of struggle, pale or bright red flush in the skin. These are various things. And what's so interesting is while TSSAA brings it out here, I still go through my first responder days of being in law enforcement and going through, spotting heat related illnesses and things of that nature with our training. So, the dizziness, the headache, are they flush, are they pale, bright red skin, have they stopped sweating, things of that nature. Once they've started to stop sweating, that you're in some real danger zone, so on and so forth. But again, you've got people that are out there that can monitor and observe, the individual status of those players that are out there. Again, looking for things like vomiting, collapsing, and these are those serious signs. Having someone out there that can spot this stuff, right? Again, severe fatigue, tripping, vomiting, collapse, clear behavioral change, getting very, very dangerous. And then, of course, as mentioned, with the increase in heat and humidity, particularly if heat and humidity is significant over the past, previous days, coaches now can go in and TSSAA suggests, a decrease in the intensity of the activity, increase the frequency and duration of rest breaks, lower their, reduce the equipment if it's not needed, reduce the uniform, drop the equipment, and then, of course, closely monitoring players, in the changing conditions. So all these are great things, and this is provided by TSSAA. These guidelines, these rules, these regulations, they do update them, and again, and rightly so, right? And so, great information there. So we'll provide a link for TSSAA, so check those out. And this goes for any sport. It's not just football. This is for any summer sport or activity that's sanctioned by a school authority or school event. So back to right. So July. What are we doing? Right? This period now is that time frame where, if you think about it, it's player focus, if you will, right? So think about that player focus. Coaches are coming back, they're shouting out their returners, maybe identifying a prospective captain or two that are going to lead the way. They're looking on who's stepping up during these early weeks of practice. They're going to talk about the freshmen, any new faces that are trying to earn new spots. A very, very good time to address this stuff early on. Oftentimes during this particular phase, if you will, the first week, couple of weeks of practice right after the dead period, talking about doing the little things right, because those little things done right, add up to, a much bigger, better, and bolder product, if you will. And talking about getting into a habit, right? So what are the 5 healthy habits of players that are coming back and can come back, really, really sharp? 1, showing up early, lead in warm-ups, listen more than you talk, right? Or listen more than they talk. Another key habit is to encourage your teammates. Be encouraging, be there for them. And I've always had this mantra as well, but once the work is done, there's still more work. There's always something to be done. There's more work to be done, right? And so stay after to work a little bit, and that's perfectly, and that's perfectly fine. These after dead period practices, these are those, things are competing with character. You've had 2 weeks off, right? And during this time frame, a lot of things are vying for your attention. Summer's getting really short now, right? And so there's a lot going on. And that being said, again, things are going to compete with the character. This is an opportunity for the faith and field moments, right? And what I mean by that is honoring something by giving your best. On the field, during conditioning, in your attitude. This is that time for grace as well as grit. And it's okay to be tired. It is most certainly okay to be tired. Just don't give up. when Ben got in the car this afternoon, or this morning, I should say, this morning, you know, prior to the dead period, he had referenced that some players, you know, did not return to practice, so on and so forth, or did not return to conditioning. That was not the case today. That might be different, you know, tomorrow or another day this week. But he was pretty avid prior to this dead period, this time of resting and getting, you know, to spend time with family. He was pretty adamant about the you know, being concerned for players that were dropping. And again, like I told him, you know, this is that time for grace and grit. It's okay to be tired. I know that you're giving up your summers, but the reward and not giving up is going to be worth it. And so that's really, really beneficial, and I think that this is a powerful moment for my son, you know, on both the on you know, as a man of faith, and bringing that to the field. You know, my son presents that, you know, as well. So from my corner of the world, how I support my son, particularly for this week, starting back at it, right after the dead period. It's extremely hot. We do have some cooler days ahead of us, but that's certainly an anomaly. And then, of course, it'll get hot again all the way until September. One of the things that I'm monitoring and trying to assist the coach on is just looking at Ben's behavior even after practice. You know, he came in, his water was already gone by the time he got in the car. He may have had the last drink right before he got into the car. But just monitoring what he's doing, making sure that he is getting the rest that he needs. Yes, he did not cut the yard today. That'll be my responsibility, see. But at any rate, what I'm referencing is that, you know, I'm okay with my son resting after practice as long as he is, you know, rejuvenated and ready to go by 6:30 tomorrow morning or the following morning after practices. Then I think I'm good to go. And there's always the weekend to do yard work, right? The other thing is, you know, I try to stay, and I will stay for my son, you know, as positive as I possibly can in the car ride. You know, just listen to what he's got to say, you know, provide nuggets of encouragement, even leadership nuggets. Again, the faith and field, you know, I do focus heavily on faith and field. You know, and what I mean by that is, you know, there are times where we'll bring out scripture verses. Just as an example, you know, Colossians 2, verse 23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. Okay? You know, very, very simple nuggets, but things that can keep Ben grounded and moving forward, and things of that nature. So I call those faith and field moments. And of course, you know, they're growing. They're certainly growing. And of course, me as a sports parent, you know, even I'm learning something as a result of those faith and field moments. We keep water around the house now, even between tap water and water bottles and things of that nature. Water is a constant thing around the house. You know, there's constant bananas that are around the house now. You know, those things with a quick kick of potassium, so on and so forth, just to kind of prevent cramping and things of that nature. You know, sugar-free Gatorades that are out there. We try to do the sugar-free Gatorades. That way, it's just not, you know, free sugar, or, you know, Ben to start drinking, things of that nature. But we also encourage Ben, don't push too hard too fast. You know, go at a pace. If you're in a situation and you don't feel comfortable and you feel and you feel pain, you know, say something. You're a 14-year-old man now, or a 14-year-old, and you're stepping into, you know, the shoes as well as the cleats of a man. And so you know, you've got to say something when you're, you know, when you don't feel something or you don't feel well, whatever, what have you. I refer to those as the see something, say something moments, right? And so that's kind of a story, that we follow here in our house, and I drop Ben off, I pick Ben up from practices, and of course we have these conversations. Again, first day back after dead period, he was certainly tired. He went back to bed, and of course he slept for three hours. But at any rate, that's what you do. You rest, you rejuvenate. I've enjoyed our time together tonight. There's a lot going on, and there's more to come out of these episodes. As far as encouragement, encourage your athlete. It's summertime, okay? It's really, really hot. Things are going to get heat up as schools get closer to starting and players are starting to return for preseason practice, so on and so forth. Be there for them, encourage them. They're going through things as well, and so they're learning. They're learning how to be a player. They're learning how to be a good teammate. They're learning how to learn leadership skills if you want to look at it through that lens. But what I'm referencing is that, there's a lot going on, and I talked about this just a moment ago. There is a lot, I will say that I do want to make it widely known that our thoughts and prayers are with those that are down in Texas. I've watched the news over the past several days, and what an impact, just a devastation that's down there. And so having experienced a natural disaster in the past, wow, just the carnage of what we've seen on screen. Again, thoughts and prayers are going out there. I would like to drop a plug. So one of the things that I've done, I noticed that there was a young child. I did not see her name, but she was wearing a ball player uniform. Again, a young girl. Don't know if she was into softball, or maybe she may have been playing t-ball or coach pitch, but she was in a uniform. I saw it on social media. And so, I've talked about faith and field moments. I'm going to provide a link. I designed something, and I'm going to provide the link. I normally don't bombard listeners with things to purchase and whatever, what have you, but I designed an item or a product, and it is through Teespring. It is a faith and field shirt, if you will. And for the entire month of July, 100% of those proceeds, or 100% of the earnings, will go to be donated to an entity down that's supporting the relief efforts in Kirk County and Texas. So I did want to drop that in here as if you decided to stay with us throughout this entire episode, you can view it. I'm going to share the link in the video itself, but I'll also share it on Podbean. So very grateful to have Podbean, very grateful to have YouTube. But again, that image, that shirt, please, go in. I designed a couple of them. Again, it is the Faith and Field series, if you will, by Seams and Downs. And it's what I teach my children, whether it's faith in a football field or faith in a softball field. Faith is faith. And with the tragedy that's occurred down in Texas, a lot of that faith, a lot of us are relying on that faith right now for a multitude of things. So check out the link if you're willing to support, by all means. Again, for the entire month of July, here it is, July the 7th, all the way through the 31st. Every dollar earned will be donated to a relief network that's down there in Texas. And of course, that will be, I will share that, and that will be verified, things of that nature. So I'm going to try to figure out who that child was, but I did see her in the social media. I actually posted about it on my Facebook account. Just absolutely devastating on a Sunday morning to see that. I couldn't sleep, and I saw her, and I was just, immediately thought of Danny, and just gut wrenching, just absolutely gut wrenching. So, folks, I've had a wonderful time tonight, just talking about the heat acclimation and the first day back to practice for Ben for football, really getting geared up for the month of August. Again, be encouraging, stay positive, and keep water. Is the key things. So again, be encouraging, stay positive, and keep water. If I have any athletes that are out there that are listening, again, listen, learn, but most importantly, be a good teammate. Thank you all. Hope you have a great evening. Thank you.